All right, so I'm out here in Bay Area, out here on the patio again. Going to talk a little bit about privacy and what I think about privacy and things like transparency, how I have struggled with and come to the terms that I have between the contradictions of privacy and transparency, because we have to accept that these two things, they're a contradiction. They're a logical contradiction. You can't have both at the same time. So here's my journey. So I went through a lot of political phases in my life, from the young liberal to the young conservative to the constitutionalist, from the libertarian to the anarchist to from the anarcho-capitalist, and I'm at this point now where I'm somewhere between probably humanist and I don't give a fuck anymore. But what I've realized is we tend to care about privacy when we have opted out of control for certain details of our life, and that's understandable. I mean, that's a natural human reaction to be upset. We feel like we're duped because people use contracts to get us to tap that we accept, and we inadvertently give up massive amounts of our rights to data that we're sharing freely because they make it easy to connect with our friends. So we share an abundance of data, or they make it easy to turn our face into the opposite gender or sex, or put some filter over our face so we look old. And we get upset when we figure out what we gave up for a second of impulsive fun, and when they can chain those things together and we have several seconds of compulsive fun an hour over the course of years, we are aghast at how they sort through encrypted data, and it disgusts us because they have access to all these data points like they actually care about us as individuals. That's not the case. What I've learned recently, I come from the background of marketing, human psychology, human nature, studying things on the macro and the micro level, history as well, and I realize that nobody cares about us as much as we think they do. So these Analytica firms, while I'm not defending them, we also have to address our own hypocrisy that we think they care about us like we think that other people are talking about us behind our backs. And then we realize people don't really care about us as much as our ego thinks people care about us. So let's talk about encryption, what is and isn't being done to protect our data. So right now, the way that our data is being handled by these big data companies that create tools for us that we love to use for free, how are they actually using our data? Because number one, it is encrypted, but still, how are they able to know certain details about us as marketers? Are they the ones that are selling the ads directly to us? And actually, no, like they have created an algorithm that uses encryption so that the people running the ad platform can't really see what we're doing in a way that we quite think they are. So while they could put together a data profile for us, the question is, why would they? There's more value for marketers like myself to use a platform that can arrange this data in a way where let's say you're in need of a new computer. Well, I log into a back end of Facebook as a marketer, and I can address that I want to target certain people down to specifics that, fit the profile of, 50 million different people in some way or another. I don't know who these people are. I actually have to give enough value for these people to give me their attention or give me information. And at that point, they've opted into some sort of advertisement that I put in front of them. So what does this have to do with privacy, transparency, encryption? Well, we use encryption every day, and we tend to complain when we aren't in the in. But encryption is available every single time somebody speaks in a different language in front of other people who don't speak that language. Every single time somebody tells an inside joke to their friends. Every single time we use lingo that other people don't get because of, our work, our profession, our expertise. Encryption is a technical way of doing this so that we can access data, even secrets, in a way where we don't have to give up who we personally are for our data to be available. So the more I've thought about this, the less I actually care about privacy, because I realize if all of my information, all of my secrets, from, secrets that are in notebooks of psychologists to my medical secrets, are all granularly stored, not connected to me as, Jace, that data could be widely spread, shared, and of no consequence to me as Jace. All the data on, that my psychologist has collected, all the data that my doctors have collected, all the data that my lawyers have collected, all of this stuff could be shared to do data science, which is, exactly what we do to understand certain things like civil rights movement. Data science was very, very valuable in understanding that, yes, there was a systemic approach to racism and sexism in the 1930s and the 1960s and the 1970s and 80s. And data science was used to prove this over time and over generations. This is usually why people wake up to things after they've done them, such as, early America woke up to the atrocities of slavery after practicing it for decades and decades and several generations. This is common throughout all history. All civilizations start this way. And what data science can help us do is, when we opt in to sharing things that, are more meaningful to scientists that actually do things like cure diseases or, help save people from suicide with preemptive care and techniques, and, can prevent all sorts of things. These scientists that could have access to data like they've been doing with the Genome Project. This is very valuable when data tools could be as easily accessible to them as they are to marketers to push ahead the consumer machine. Imagine what happens when we freely share more data that is encrypted in a granular fashion, that means individually compartmentalized, that a scientist studying, mental health or a chronic issue that you have that is embarrassing or could, hurt your career if people knew about this, they could research your data and never know who you are. It's like a double blind, probably deeper than double blind. It's data only blind research where they can look past. Yep, still going. Okay, sorry about that. It's a blind research that no one ever has to know who you are, like anonymous stories, anonymous tips. We all know how, important anonymous tips are for stopping, criminal perpetrators. Imagine what we could do with anonymous tipping by sharing our encrypted data in a publicly accessible way that isn't tied to our personal identity. Imagine the cures that we could come up with, which I know as a marketer is a taboo word in the world of medicine. Pretty much the only thing that makes marketing code of ethics actually ever have teeth. but we could actually see progress in things that we think are impossible, things that, people tout as conspiracy theories, like, cures to cancer, etc. This is what's hidden in the data, that on one hand we're sold the idea of privacy, but in an extreme centralized fashion. But if we use decentralized technology for applications other than currency or money, we can start to have amazing results happen when things like genome projects and, data about psychology or medicine is detached from our personal identity and able to be researched with scientists teaming up with data scientists. Imagine what we'll be able to do with our own families when we have access to the data science of our own family, and we can use dashboards and tools as easily as we use calculators now. Sure, it would be hard to trust these tools in the beginning, just as it was hard for humanity to trust calculators in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, because before we had calculators, we had a type of human expert called the calculator. And now we don't even need calculators, and we also have replaced not only the human position of calculators, but the human position of computers. That too was a job that was killed by machine learning back in the 1950s and 60s. Yes, machine learning existed back then. In the big bad AI of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were calculators and computers. So with the perspective that I have now, the logical solution to our privacy concerns seems pretty radical, but it's actually just so logical that it challenges our irrational assumptions, and that is transparency. Granular transparency, compartmentalized transparency, separating valuable data from the things we may actually want to keep private, like our identity. And then we come into problems such as, well, what happens when people can submit data multiple times, like, voting fraud? Well, the algorithm can know if the same person is submitting things over and over and over, because they can see things that are very hard for humans to see, and it can separate things in a way where we don't have to trust a human to go through these secrets and data. The same way, we don't have to trust the calculator to know that it's going to give us the correct result. We're just in the infancy of algorithms of modern age, afraid of the big bad AI like Skynet, like people were back in the 60s and 70s. That's why movies like Terminator became so popular, because people were afraid of computers and calculators as we know them, and it turned into movie franchises like the Terminator. So let's gain some perspective. Things like Terminator and Skynet were not prophecies of where AI was going. These were reactions to what people were calling AI back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So if you don't worry about your calculator or your personal computer becoming sentient on a day-to-day basis, you don't worry about your smartwatch, trying to take over the world. Don't worry about your smartphone trying to kill you. Then you don't need to worry about it into the future. This isn't naivety, it's just logic. It's exactly why people like Elon Musk were really worried about AI until he just accepted the harsh truth that he was trying to get other people to think about it more responsibly, which we need to. But instead of telling other people what to do, he decided to just get in on the game and offer better options with his perspective and his wisdom, which is what we'll all be doing in several generations, because just like very few people knew how to use computers and calculators in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will know how to use data science tools the quantum computer in their brain and what we call scary AI now, and look at them like calculators. So yeah, a lot has changed in my perspective of privacy, because we honestly don't care as much about privacy as we say we do, because according to our actions, we don't care about privacy. We do care about transparency. We demand transparency from governments, from corporations. So we need to accept that, generally speaking, we tend to accept a logical fallacy. We can't have both extreme privacy and extreme transparency. If we want privacy to the extent of wanting to take back control of the things we've given away freely, rather than, promoting the idea of encryption of our data and sharing it freely, we won't get anywhere. The same way, if we want to advocate for extreme transparency that connects to our personal identities with everything, we run into the very thing that Elon Musk was worried about, in why we need to take control of our own lives. The same way Elon Musk decided to take control of his own life and his own skills and his own data by using the resources he had available to him to create Neuralink. And we project this future of Skynet, that people were afraid that personal computers and calculators, which they thought were artificial intelligence back then, were going to someday awaken and start killing us all. But calculators and personal computers never did that. And now calculators and personal computers have evolved into phones and social networks. And we need to take a relative page out of Elon Musk's book and understand the balance, that if we don't want to give up the progress we've made because we're afraid of learning more, of growing, of adapting, of learning how to thrive in a new digital environment, we're going to send ourselves back to the Stone Age out of fear. Plain and simple. It's not simple. It's radically simple. It's simplifying things that we've overcomplicated. That makes it seem overcomplicated because we believe that there need to be complicated answers to complicated problems. But just like bankers love compound math, it benefits them and it hurts us. This is a similar case when it comes to things like privacy and transparency. Some things are artificially complicated. And the contradiction is the solutions may be so simple because they're based on real logical principles that we've been duped into believing some answers need to be complicated because the problem is complicated. But in reality, the answer could be proverbially simple and make us feel uncomfortable because the intellectual part of us wants us to think that complicated problems need complicated answers. But that's not always the case. In fact, when it comes to the natural process of things, complicated problems are due to the ego of intellect. Simple principles are why things like theory of relativity and, people like Stephen Hawking and these things become more and more true over time. Because as advanced knowledge becomes less advanced and more common, we start to understand that simple truths outweigh complex problems and complex answers when we have better education. So let's be patient. Let's see what we can do and not ask what science can do for us, but what we can do for science. Otherwise, our complaining is just complaining and excuses to not improve, not grow, to have somebody else fix our problems. And that's why we feel like we have lack of respect often, because we're not willing to do our part simply because it is hard. But this won't get done because it's easy. We find an easy answer. Things will only get worse if we find an easy answer that somebody else can do for us. We must do this because it is hard. Because nobody wants to be that generation that several generations down the line looks back ashamed of. We can do better because we are better. And it requires us to keep being better and not get complacent, not get content, to improve. Information and knowledge is easier to come by than ever before. We just need to figure out discipline that works when we're cutting out middlemen, which includes experts. Thank you.